Hello and welcome to Where to Go. I'm James Atkinson, Senior Brand Manager at DK Eyewitness.
And I'm Lucy Richards, Senior Editor at DK Eyewitness.
And welcome to Where to Go, where every fortnight we find out more about the world's favourite travel destinations with the people who know those places best. And Lucy, we're doing a bit of a destination almost semi-close to your heart at the minute in terms of... I know you've talked about your best friend Pops moving there.
Yeah.
We're talking about Bangkok. Have you ever been? Have you been yet?
No, I haven't been. The plan was to go at the end of this year, but obviously I've then had the wonderful news that I'm expecting a baby. So unfortunately, I won't be going to Bangkok end of this year.
That'll do it.
Other fish to fry, but I really want to go at some point because but BFF Poppy's lived up there for 2 years and I get to live vicariously through her as she's having this amazing life in Bangkok. But I've yet to go, so I'm delighted. I know Poppy will be delighted that we're talking about Bangkok today.
Yes, absolutely. It's only a little delay, Lucy. You'll get there. I'm convinced you will.
James, have you been to Bangkok?
I have not. No, I think I mentioned when we spoke to Lucy about Chiang Mai earlier in the year. Yeah, it was earlier in the year. I sort of talked about how I've always been like really into Thai food and had it as like on my bucket list. And yeah, it is one of the places that I've never been to. And I know it's like kind of firmly on the backpacker trail, but I think there's a lot being said at the minute about the other side of life to Bangkok, it being like one of the world's most visited cities, it being this kind of like meeting point across the whole of South Asia. And yeah, it's somewhere that I've always kind of, I don't know, you hear so much about it and I really want to know what really goes on there. So who do we have to tell us about it, Lucy?
Yes, we have Dane Halpin, Director of PR and Communications at Minor Hotels in Bangkok. Australian-born Dane Halpin moved to the Thai capital over 10 years ago and is now raising his family in the city. Welcome, Dane.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, Dane. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on Where to Go. As usual, we're going to begin with learning a little bit more about our guest, Dane, followed by his all-important recommendations of where to go and insider knowledge of Bangkok. And finally, we'll hear his advice for planning the perfect trip.
So, Dane, what brought you to Bangkok and what made you stay?
It's a good question. I think like a lot of expats who probably end up in Bangkok for quite a while, it kind of started off as a fairly short-term venture and has just kind of extended and extended and extended. But I guess a long story short, I mean, I basically moved to Southeast Asia straight out of university. So I studied journalism and I had a chance to do an internship in Laos, actually. So in Vientiane, the capital of Laos. And so that was a 1-month internship. And so I kind of finished that and I didn't really feel the urge to go home. And the opportunity kind of came up just to stay on there it was just like a local newspaper in Vientiane. So I did that, stayed there for about a year, then met up with one of my best mates from back home. And we did a kind of a long bicycle trip from Bangkok up to Chengdu in China.
Oh, wow.
Which was about 5 or 6 months. And along the way, so up in the north of Thailand, I met who is now my wife. So, yeah, so I guess a little bit of romance thrown in there as well. So when we finished the bicycle trip, I basically moved back to the north of Thailand, then moved down to the south of Thailand. Eventually kind of ended up in Bangkok, mainly just for work and things like that. There's a few more opportunities in Bangkok. And yeah, 11 years later, here I am.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
So in terms of what made me stay, though, I mean, I think that's I think that's a question I kind of still ask myself, to be honest, because it is it is a city, I guess, even now, I mean, I still have a massive love-hate relationship with it. You know, when I think back to my first few times kind of passing through, you know, way back at the beginning when I was still kind of in those backpacking days, I absolutely hated Bangkok. I mean,
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'd really try and go out of my way to kind of avoid it. It was just, I don't know, it's a very intense and overwhelming city in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I've always been the kind of person, I maybe prefer a little bit of respite and relaxation. So I would always kind of, I'd pass through, but I'd never really hang around too long. But over time, I think once you start to understand it and kind of, learn your way around, learn how to navigate it, it's such a enormous beast of a city with so much to discover. And there's an energy to it that I think is just so addictive. And that's, I don't know, I've never felt that kind of energy somewhere else. And I think for better or worse, it's never boring, put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your honesty there. I think that's maybe even the first time we've had a guest who used to hate where they live.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the best way to start, but it's
No. It's quite interesting. I think there's lots of cities in the world that are quite daunting to lots of like travelers, and actually Bangkok is one of the biggest cities in the world. It's one of the most visited cities in the world as well. And actually, like, kind of finding your place there must have been quite tricky. Like, how did you find yourself like assimilating to the city when you actually moved there?
I mean, you'll hear it said about the city all the time, and it's true. It's a city of contrast, and I think that it really does apply to like every aspect of the city. And I think even in terms of settling in there and assimilating it, you still feel that same contrast. It's kind of overwhelming and daunting in a lot of ways, but it's also very easy to kind of fit in a lot of ways at the same time. So you just got this constant kind of dichotomy. It's one of the biggest cities in the world by populations. It's about 15 million people.
Wow.
Which I was actually just looking it up before we spoke. So in terms of population, it's like a similar size to Greater LA.
Wow.
But then in terms of land area, it's about 9% the size of LA. So you've got that volume of people really just kind of squeezed into a pretty small space at the end of the day, which, yeah, like I said, it can make things kind of overwhelming. But, I don't know if you guys have spent much time here before, but, it's the people I think are, it almost sounds a bit of a cliche to say it, but they genuinely are incredibly welcoming. I think, a lot of cities you can go to, and as an outsider, it can be very difficult to actually scratch beneath the surface and kind of interact with local people. Groups of friends get very cliquey. It's very difficult to kind of break in. I think with Bangkok, it's quite the opposite. I mean, I think the expat community is very open naturally because everyone's kind of having that same experience. So everyone's quite eager to just connect and welcome new people. The Thai people themselves are also kind of very open to just hanging out with random Australian people that are just kind of drifting through the city. So that makes it easier too. I think on the kind of, on the expat side, I think it can be difficult longer term because it's a very transient city for expats. So, people do come for a year or two on contract or whatever, and then they move on. So kind of maintaining those long-term groups of expat friends it can be quite difficult. But, fairly early on, again, I was lucky, my wife is Thai and she kind of grew up in Bangkok. So that did certainly help to ease the transition. But then, to be fair, I was pretty lazy for maybe the first year, but I did make a fairly decent effort to learn to read, speak and write Thai relatively early on. And I think that also helps immensely, obviously, in terms of just unlocking different parts of the city. I mean, it's the kind of place you don't necessarily need to do that. Lots of my friends who have been here 10, 20 years, they still, can't really say too much beyond, hello and thank you. And that's fine. I mean, you can get by, but kind of the further you go out of the center of the city, it becomes much more advantageous. I think you can just form a much deeper connection with the city if you are able to obviously communicate with people, funnily enough.
Yeah.
Just to finally kind of wrap up this section, could you summarize what's your favorite thing about living in Bangkok if you were to kind of like in a nutshell?
There's an energy to it that's it's just so visceral and it's so overwhelming at times. There's always a kind of an excitement. There's always something happening. But at the same time, I mean, you've got all these people and all this energy, but it's still kind of weirdly laid back. There's, again, that kind of contrast that I was talking about before. People aren't really, in a hurry. It's kind of everything about it is utterly unpretentious. From the food to the nightlife, there is that kind of just laid back quality to it that really a city of this size, it feels like it has no right to be that laid back, but it is that kind of laid back. When I go home, you kind of walk down George Street in Sydney, or the kind of main street of Sydney, and you almost expect to see tumbleweeds, rolling down the main street because it just feels so quiet. You're just like, where is everybody? But Bangkok, there's just always something going on, and there's always something open. There's always something to do. It doesn't really matter, what time time it is. I mean, I think that is my favorite thing about it. I mean, it's the reason why I haven't been able to get away for 11 years now.
Cool. I mean, yeah, so let's look forward to finding out some more of those things. You touched on quite a few good points there just now, so let's find out a bit more about your favorite things to do. Dane, to kick things off, we're going to ask you to give us a quick fire tour of Bangkok. We're going to name a few categories and you have to suggest just one thing to do. So are you ready?
Yes.
So we're going to kick off with your favourite view.
Okay. Well, I'm going to break your rules straight away because I've got kind of two.
That's allowed. Before James says anything, that's allowed, Dane.
Okay, I suppose so. That's fine. That's all right.
It's actually, I mean, it's kind of a difficult question in some ways. I don't know, when I think of Bangkok, I don't think anyone would ever describe Bangkok as a beautiful city. Like, it's just, it's just not. I mean, there's kind of, architecturally, it's typically it's quite utilitarian. So there's not a lot of architectural beauty. Heritage is not necessarily something that's valued a lot culturally. So again, there's not a lot of heritage maybe left in there are parts, but there's not a lot. And even geographically, like, it's just flat for like 100 kilometers in any direction. So, you know, there's not that kind of physical beauty in the built environment, at least.
Okay.
But I mean, if we're talking views, I think, you know, it is when you zoom out, there is beauty just in the sheer magnitude of what this city is. I mean, it is just vast, and it's just, you know, concrete towers kind of almost as far as the eye can see, which kind of sounds awful, and, you know, in some ways it maybe is, but again, when you step back and view it in its entirety, there's just something that's kind of awe-inspiring about it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think, you know, ultimately the best places to take that in are going to be from a rooftop where you kind of have that vista. And so there are quite a few rooftop bars around Bangkok. I mean, they're pretty easy to find if you Google around. But I think for me, probably the best one is one called Serene, Seen. So it's on top of the Avani Riverside Hotel. So it's on the river, but it's over the other side of the river, and it kind of faces kind of east-northeast. So back facing directly across the city. And so it's one of the few places where you can actually see the entire city in one go, basically. And you know, if you go there for sunset and just watch as that kind of transitions into night and all the lights of the city come on, I don't know, there's something pretty special about that. And so that's a view that you kind of never really get tired of. But the second part, I think, is kind of also an important one. I guess it's not really a view, but, well, it kind of is in an abstract way, I suppose. There's not a lot of physical beauty in the city. And, you know, I think that's true to an extent. Obviously, you can find it, but it's not always there. But I think, you know, where Bangkok really is kind of unique, or, you know, there is an incredibly rich human beauty in the city, I think. And I think that's the important distinction. It's not really about the built environment that's beautiful. It's really kind of everything that happens in between it. And I think there is, you know, the ability to kind of absorb that aspect of the city is something really incredible. And it's hard because I think it's hard to pinpoint one particular like location where you can take that in. But there are certainly, you know, particular parts of the city that are maybe best suited to taking in that kind of view, again, in the kind of abstract sense. Yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but those are my two views.
But Dane, the most important one, in my opinion, is your favourite thing to eat, which often people find hard to choose just one.
Yeah, if it's only one answer, it's everything. Because
it's a very clever answer.
No, we've been foiled.
A loophole.
No, I mean, I think Bangkok. It should be kind of better known as really, you know, one of the world's top culinary capitals. I mean, it's an incredible food city, and that's, you know, even only talking about Thai cuisine. But, you know, obviously there's a very rich kind of international tapestry of the food that's available in the city. Bearing in mind though that it is the quick fire round, I will follow the rules this time, and I'll pick one. And it's kind of it's kind of the Thai staple. I mean, if we think of that kind of everyday food that is that kind of ultimate comfort food, I think, to anyone in anywhere in Thailand, but particularly Bangkok. So it's pad kra pao, which is It's a fairly simple dish of kind of any meat that you want, and you would cook it with chili, garlic, and holy basil is kind of the key ingredient for the fragrance. It's super spicy. It should be at least quite spicy. Sweet, salty. Like all Thai food, it's that kind of that nice kind of balance of particularly those three flavors. So if you order that though with more grob, which is the crispy pork belly, which is that kind of just deep fried, fatty kind of goodness. And then on top of that, they'll put a fried egg. And I think for Thai food, I think just that kind of humble fried egg is just like a work of art. It's just like, it's amazing. Yeah. Like I never eat fried eggs if it's like an English breakfast or something like that. I'm never going to eat fried eggs like that. But a Thai fried egg, I mean, it's literally like a deep fried egg. It's incredible. And so they'll put the egg on top, you break it and all that egg will just kind of run through the crispy pork and the pad kapow. And that's pretty good. If I could only kind of live off one dish in Bangkok, I think that's probably going to be the one.
We've said it before, Lucy. We'll say it again. Why do we record this podcast at lunchtimes? It's horrible.
Torture.
Anyway, on with the quickfire round. That's a great answer. Thanks so much, Dane. So next up is your favourite thing to drink.
So it's cha manao, basically, is what it's called. It's lime iced tea, so it's served cold. I would always advise you whenever ordering any drinks in Thailand to tell them to like tone it down on the sweetness, because otherwise you'll end up with like 40% sugar syrup, which is fine if you like that kind of thing, but it can be pretty intense.
Good tip.
We also kind of should talk about the nighttime drinks that are, a little bit more fun.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know if it's my favorite, because it's not always your best friend the next morning if you drink too much of it. But it's so it's called yadong, which is, again, if you translate it directly, it's literally like fermented medicine, I guess. But it's basically, I mean, it's like very, very high proof, rice whiskey that's fermented with all sorts of different kind of medicinal herbs, and it really can be anything. I mean, there's no kind of set, recipes on what that needs to be.
I mean, really good answers all around.
All of them excellent answers. We're almost at the end. The penultimate question on the quickfire round is your favourite day activity, Dane.
It depends a little bit. So I think the one, I guess, go-to that I always take people when they're visiting Bangkok it's called Kokret. So it's kind of to the north of Bangkok. It's maybe like a 45-minute drive. So basically, running through the middle of Bangkok, you've got the Chao Phraya River, and that river runs all the way up to, and beyond, but up to Ayutthaya, which is the former kind of royal capital of Thailand. And so, traditionally that river was obviously a main transport network. And there's this one section of the river, in between Ayutthaya and Bangkok, where there was like a big bend in the river. And so that they basically cut a new canal to, bypass that bend. And so what it's done is created a little island basically in the middle of the river. It's not that little, it's quite big. It takes maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours to walk around. But because it is an island, I mean, there's no bridge connection at all. It's this weird little pocket of like rural life that's just kind of in the middle of this just immense urban sprawl. And so it's very famous for its pottery, and you can go there and just kind of walk around, and there's markets and things like that. There's loads of food to eat. It can get a little bit busy on weekends, but it's still interesting. But it's actually quite nice to go during the week when it's a little bit quieter, and you can basically just walk around it. I mean, it's a really nice trip to walk around. You can rent a bicycle and do it by bicycle if it's a bit quicker. You can also charter like little boats and do boat trips kind of around the island and do different stops around there. And then on the island as well is a place called Chit Beer. And it was one of the first, again, it's been open, quite a few years now, but it was really the first kind of craft brewery in Thailand, really.
Okay.
Which again is still kind of a nascent scene, but it's obviously grown quite a lot. but it kind of opened at a time when it was still not legal to be brewing your own beer in Thailand. But they were just kind of, there's always a little bit of a gap in Thailand between the law and the enforcement of the law, let's put it that way. And so they were kind of able to get around that. And it's really chilled out. The beer's pretty good. And it's a nice way to just kind of end the day if you've just done a 2-hour walk around the island. And then, across the other side, there's a bunch of great restaurants that are like along the river that serve really great food as well. So that's a really nice day out to kind of get that little touch of rural life, so close to Bangkok.
All right. I had no idea that kind of existed so close to Bangkok as well.
No.
All right, last one of the quickfire round. Not so quickfire round, but quickfire round all the same. This is bringing it back into the city, probably, I assume. But your favourite museum or gallery?
There's a few really good ones around Bangkok. It's actually, again, I think it's kind of maybe underappreciated as an art city and as a creative city. Again, it's quickfire, so I'm kind of only allowed one, but it's kind of, again, it's kind of 1.5, I guess, put it that way. So, I mean, I think like one that's always just good to go to, it's the Bangkok Art and Culture Center. It's like right in the middle of Bangkok. It's really big. I mean, the building itself is quite stunning. I mean, it's clearly kind of taken inspiration from the Guggenheim in the sense it's got that it's kind of built around that central kind of atrium space. It's got that swirling kind of ramp around the central atrium. And there's always kind of something going on, or multiple things going on there at the same time. The quality can be a little bit mixed. It's always worth just popping in and kind of seeing what's going on. And because it does rotate quite often, it's always nice to just go and hang out there. But then I think what's also nice is that is actually a starting point for a really nice like street art walk that you can do.
Cool.
So, which kind of dates back a few years ago now. So I can't remember the exact years, maybe like 2014 or something. It was some kind of collaboration with European Union or some kind of European Union body where they basically held this big street art festival basically in Bangkok, and so brought a whole bunch of European artists to the city, and got a bunch of Thai artists involved as well, and just started creating these installations all around the city. And so one of them basically, if you start from the Art and Culture Center, it's a little bit hard to explain, but if you walk north until you get to the canal that's called Klong Sen Sep, and then you head west from there basically, and you're kind of walking along this canal, and that in itself is kind of an experience, because there's a lot of very old communities just along that canal. It's an interesting walk even without the street art factor, but then all of the walls basically along that canal obviously started as part of that street art festival, but it's been added to over time. And then you can walk for maybe a kilometer or so or two before you get to Ratchathani. And just near the BTS station there's kind of a big kind of vacant plot of land, and it's kind of called Graffiti Park. Basically, if you Google Graffiti Park, you can usually find that pretty easily.
I've seen this before. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a nice ending point to that walk. So, yeah, that's kind of again a nice experience. You can start at the Art and Culture Center, see what's on there, and then go for that kind of walk, along behind the canal, and finish at Graffiti Park. So I think it's a pretty nice experience.
Awesome.
Great.
Well done on finishing the quickfire round.
I think we'll be expanding on some of these with our next questions as well, Dane. So I'd like to circle back, because we have to talk a bit more about food. Obviously, Bangkok is, as you said, Dane, a very international city, it's international cuisine. It's famous for its street food, but it's also home to lots of Michelin-star restaurants. Yep. What do you recommend as some places that our sort of foodie listeners must visit? Yeah,
again, always a hard one, because... Yeah, there really is something for everyone. I mean, I think it's a nice thing with Bangkok is, you can go and have an amazing meal for like $1.
Yeah.
Or you can go and spend like $500 as well, and you can have an amazing meal as well, and kind of anything in between. And like I said before, there's obviously Thai cuisine, which is, you can spend years just exploring Thai cuisine, but Bangkok it's become kind of increasingly cosmopolitan, and you've got some just incredible food from all over the world now. I mean, this could be a whole separate podcast, and it's a little bit hard to even know where to start. As a city, I did check just earlier, and so for this year, Asia's 50 best restaurants, for example, 9 of those are in Bangkok, which...
Okay.
for comparison, Singapore also had 9, but like Hong Kong had 5 and Tokyo had 7. So, in terms of top restaurants, you're kind of starting to beat out Tokyo. It's kind of, I guess, gives you a sense of at the upper end of the spectrum, at that fine dining level, like the kind of caliber of experience that you can have in Bangkok.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, obviously you've got street food and Michelin star, but those things are also not necessarily mutually exclusive, which I think is also quite nice.
I was going to say this, yeah.
Yeah, so there's one famous one. I think most people would know it because it was on a Netflix show a little while ago. It's called J-Fi, and it's it earned a Michelin star, and it's literally street food, but I mean, she's a very iconic character. She cooks in these big ski goggles and with a beanie on, and I think it's as much about her kind of charisma as the food itself. Yeah, I think Bangkok, like it's hard to kind of recommend specific restaurants, but there are definitely like areas that are worth exploring. So I think I mentioned before, like Chinatown, Yawalat, like that's very well known, and that's it's famous. There's a lot of like food tours and things that will go through that area, and at the end of the day, it's with good reason. It's like a street food mecca, basically. So it is worth going there and having a look. But it's, I don't know, in my opinion, it's probably a lot of the street food there it can be a little bit overrated, and there are kind of other areas, Ban Tat Tong, for example, Tapajan, Bang Lampu. Like again, it's hard to explain where these areas are necessarily in an audio podcast, but yeah, you can take a little bit of a look around. I think they're relatively easy to find, and they're kind of areas with high concentrations of just really good street food that you can find. I said before, I think a really important part of Bangkok is that it is very international, and there's a lot of great international cuisine to enjoy as well. For Japanese, for example, there's a huge expat Japanese community in Bangkok, and it's mostly concentrated in this area, kind of along Sukhumvit Road, but in between Prompong and Tonglo. And you've just got hundreds of amazing Japanese restaurants. But, if you're looking for omakase, for example, Sushi Masato is as good or better than what you would find anywhere in the world, including Tokyo. Or, teppen for izakaya is a really fun experience as well. So yeah, that Japanese culinary culture is really strong and really, really good. For Indian, I mentioned before that they're kind of Paharat Indian Quarter. There's lots of Indian kind of everywhere, and there's good places to go everywhere, but that's a bit of a central hub. So there's a few kind of just places you can wander around and find. Middle Eastern, North African, there's a small community that's kind of Sukhumvit Soi 3, I guess. And so it's literally called Soi Arab. Soi just means alley in Thai. And it's just full of restaurants, Middle Eastern, North African restaurants. And that can be quite an experience too, but amazing Middle Eastern food. And then, I don't know, somewhere I always like to take people to as well is Otako, a fresh market. And again, I think it has been ranked previously as one of the top fresh markets globally. And it's not so, like, it's quite clean, I guess. So it doesn't give you that, again, it's not quite that visceral experience you might get in other kind of fresh markets around the city. But if you're just looking for incredibly high quality produce, fruit, vegetables, meat, and then they've also got kind of a food court area that serves, amazing Thai food as well. That's a really good place to go. Probably in terms of fresh produce, it's selling, easily the best in Thailand, probably the best in Southeast Asia. Again, it's kind of interesting what some of those restaurants are doing as well. So I think one super interesting one that's popped up maybe in the last year or two is called Potong. And that's just a great experience, partly because of the food. It's like a 20-course degustation, but also because of kind of the story and the history behind it. So it's located in this like 5-story building that I think was built in, the early 1900s. And it was kind of, it's a family-owned building, and it used to be a Chinese herbal medicine business. And it's basically, the building has been restored, but then, I guess the concept for the menu then is this, it's Thai Chinese cuisine, but then it's kind of influenced by a lot of this kind of herbal medicine, I guess, that was, pioneered it in that particular business in the past. And then, on the top 2 levels there, they've got Opium Bar, basically is the name of it. And it's a really great cocktail bar as well. So you can kind of, work your way up through the 5 levels and have a really great experience there. So that's probably another one. Again, if you're looking to, it's not necessarily the most affordable, but if you're looking to have a kind of really interesting experience that has a kind of nice story and a nice kind of cultural heritage foundation to it, that's probably one to check out as well.
Thanks for that epic tour of, foodie tour of Bangkok, Dane. That was wow.
I'm so hungry.
You can't believe. Are there any kind of best kept secrets that you can kind of let our listeners into?
So there are a few. I think one thing that's good to know, I mean, cinemas here are just absolutely mind-blowing and almost an experience in themselves. So, I mean, if you're looking at kind of, particularly like the kind of higher end shopping malls. So, I don't know, Bangkok, it's a very shopping mall city for better or worse. That is kind of our town square, basically. Some of the higher end ones like Paragon or Icon Siam, they have cinemas where, I mean, you're literally in bed with
cool.
a mini bar and a kind of butler serving you champagne and just, snacks and all sorts of incredible stuff.
Great stuff.
Another place I think is super interesting to check out is, if you like reading, is the Nielsen Hayes Library. Again, I keep saying there's not a lot of heritage in Bangkok, and then I keep talking about kind of heritage places. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of the few kind of neoclassical buildings left in Bangkok. And it was designed by an Italian guy who's also the same guy who designed the Royal Throne Hall in Bangkok, which is this kind of, again, this beautiful structure. But, the library itself, I'm pretty sure it's privately owned, but I mean, it's publicly accessible. And I mean, you can get in contact with them, but they often have, maybe on the weekends, they do like storytelling sessions for the kids. And then, there's 20, 30,000 books or something like that you can peruse at your leisure. But just the building itself is beautiful. There's like a nice garden space as well. So that's a nice little kind of respite of calm and culture, I guess, and, right in the middle of the madness.
Awesome.
A couple of other ones super quickly. I think, we just think a lot about Bangkok as a kind of city that's on a river, and a lot of the emphasis is on the riverside parts of things. I think a lot of people don't really think or don't realize that it is actually a coastal city, so it does actually meet the ocean as well. But that coastal front is really interesting because it's not like a beach. It's not like a hard coast that you would kind of expect, I suppose, in most cities. It's this kind of patchwork of flooded. It's a lot of prawn farms and crab farms and salt farms as well. So it's probably 90% of it is underwater, but then you've just got these like elevated roadways and things like that. But if you go to a place called Bangkok, there's this kind of 4-kilometer elevated kind of bicycle path that kind of is built into the water but runs along the coast. And so you can hire bicycles from the local museum there. I mean, you're just passing all this kind of farmland, basically, this kind of flooded farmland. But then you will pass like communities. There's one called Bansakla, which is, again, it's a community. It's probably 300 or 400 homes maybe, but they're all built up on stilts over the water. There is a paved road through it, but it's mostly still kind of people using boats and things like that to get around. So that's a nice, I guess, experience to see. Again, it does to be so close to Bangkok and still have that type of community existing is kind of interesting too.
Cool.
Yeah, probably, I guess, other one just to note super quickly is I think the live music scene in Bangkok, like it's certainly not as well developed as maybe, cities in Europe or the States or something like that. But it can be really fun. I guess 3 kind of good places to check out. I always love taking people to Saxophone, which is a kind of jazz club that's been around for maybe 40 years or something like that. So it's right near Victory Monument. Again, it's mostly a kind of Thai crowd that goes there, but it gets super lively. It's a really fun atmosphere. It's mostly like cover bands, but they're very good musicians, and you can have a fun night out there. Adhere the 13th is always fun, kind of a bit more at the kind of dive bar end of the spectrum. It's more a blues bar. It's always a good night out as well.
Cool.
And maybe for like a more modern, kind of cooler, younger kind of vibe, there's a place called Black Cabin, which is great as well. It's pretty small, but they get some super talented musicians, expat and Thai, a bit of a mix of genres. I mean, anything from jazz to kind of soul and rock as well. So that's a good place to check out.
Awesome. I had no
Great.
idea. So amazing sort of cultural recommendations. Let's quickly touch on some of the present and future Bangkok. A city of contrast, Bangkok is simultaneously ancient and modern, noisy and serene. For every glitzy skyscraper, you'll find a small but well-tended shrine, and for every bustling market, a quiet canal. With DK Eyewitness Top 10 Bangkok, it's yours to explore. Find it in all good bookstores or via the link in our episode bio.
So Dane, we're going to wrap up just with a last couple of questions. So firstly, when is the best time, whether that's a month or a season, for listeners to visit Bangkok?
Yeah, so I think Bangkok, I mean, it's always going to be hot and then sometimes it'll be wet. And that's about the kind of extent of the seasonality. I mean, absolute best time, probably December, because it does get a little bit cooler and it's just a little bit more bearable to be outside. April, May is like brutally hot, like just yeah, it's kind of unpleasant to be outside for too long. And then it typically rains a lot in September, October. But as I kind of said before, it's not really like an outdoor kind of city, so you typically will spend a lot of time inside, and it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. I think one thing's worth flagging, like the last few years there's been a bit of a, I guess, growing issue with air pollution, particularly in like the January to April period. And so, you know, probably if you're coming with kids in particular, or maybe elderly, or just anyone with respiratory problems, that's probably not the best time.
Noted. That's really good advice. And are there any sort of particular events to mark in the calendar coming up?
I mean, I think one thing that's probably, if you had to pick one, I mean, I would always say people should come and experience Songkran at least once, which is Thai New Year. Yeah. So it's a 3-day festival, 13th to the 15th of April. So I just said, 30 seconds ago, it's a brutally hot time of the year, which means though that having a kind of water festival right in the middle of that time works really well. Sense. So, I mean, the whole country just descends into this giant 3-day kind of drunken water fight. And it's just absolute madness and chaotic and heaps of fun, basically. So particularly in Bangkok, you'll kind of have 3 areas, basically like Silom, Khao San, Chok Chai Si, and a couple of others, but they're kind of the big hubs. And you'll have, people riding around on the back of pickup trucks with just huge buckets of water. And, the pickup truck will drive around and just throwing water at people. And it's mayhem, but it's a good experience. It's worth kind of being here for that.
Sounds amazing.
And finally, Dane, so in this season, we are particularly thinking about how travel can benefit the local community. So the people of Bangkok in this instance, what are the best ways to support the locals when listeners visit Bangkok?
I think there's a few ways, and it's, I don't know if there's anything that's kind of distinct to Bangkok that maybe, isn't good advice anywhere else. I mean, I think I have heard someone mention on your show previously to kind of, avoid Airbnbs where possible. And I probably would echo that just because, the hotel and hospitality industry in Bangkok, it's such a big employer of Thai people. And it's actually one of, it's obviously not the only, but it's one of the few careers that does actually offer people pretty good social mobility. And, coming out of what's been a pretty rough couple of years with COVID, I think it is good to support that industry where we can. And, I think a lot of people think of Bangkok as a very affordable city. And it obviously is if you're earning pounds or euros and traveling here. But it's actually not a very, there are significant inequality problems. And, it's not necessarily an affordable city if you're, living here earning a kind of minimum wage. And so just that housing affordability issue is, it's the same here with Airbnb as it is elsewhere. So that's certainly one thing. One thing I would say, I mean, plastic pollution is a massive, massive problem here. And people are still kind of hopelessly addicted to single-use plastic. Like I've had arguments with street food vendors where they were just adamant, like, you must take this plastic bag because the food is hot and you'll burn yourself otherwise. That kind of awareness, I think, of the problem it's growing, but it's still not as widespread as it needs to be. So do be conscious of that. You can refuse the bag or kind of hand it back. And I think that's always a sensible thing to do. I mentioned before, air quality is a big problem January to April. And to be honest, it's a little bit unclear what the root cause of that is, but it seems that at least a big part of it is agricultural burning. And a lot of that is kind of linked to food conglomerates that control a lot of that, the farming industry, basically. So, another thing maybe to be conscious of is just to look for restaurants, F&B outlets where you can that are, I guess more responsible in their food sourcing, that are kind of sourcing locally, growing locally where they can. It'll help a little bit. And I think as anywhere, just spread the money, as far and wide as you can. Get out there, get out of the center, go to kind of offbeat places and eat at local restaurants and support those local businesses as much as you can. It's the Bangkok economy and the Thailand economy generally is so heavily reliant on tourism, and the last 3 years a lot of people are still doing it really tough, particularly out of those central kind of areas. I think any support that they can get is going to be appreciated.
That's really good advice. I mean, you say it's like little things, but those little things add up to a lot. So
absolutely,
I think that's a really, really good note to end on. But thanks so much, Dane. You've painted such a wonderful picture of a city that I thought I knew about, and I didn't know that much about at all.
Yeah, there have been some surprises. Like, I had no idea about coffee culture or cinema culture. But at the same time, Dane, a lot of what you've said, yes, that's my impression of Bangkok, that kind of frenetic energy. So thank you so much.
It's been an excellent episode. Thank you so much, Dane.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Huge thank you to Dane for a wonderful tour of Bangkok. I really do, honestly, it really added up with my understanding from Poppy, Dane's descriptions, and I feel it's whetted my appetite. I will make it there eventually, but for now, I feel like I've had a good taste of it.
Oh, yeah. We've travelled vicariously through Bangkok today. Yeah, so comprehensive, so well researched. Thank you so much, Dane. We hope you've enjoyed that just as much as we have, listeners. And next time round, listener, we've got a real treat for you, actually. So we've got another sort of team episode. We are going to be looking exclusively at some of the best destinations to visit in winter 2023. So we'll be joined by some of our lovely editors. We've also got Dan Stables coming back to the pod as well. Wonderful Dan. I don't know if you remember his Manchester episode, but he is over here talking about lots of European destinations and where to go this winter. We're really excited about that one. It'll be a great one to join us for. So we will see you then in a fortnight's time. And it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And we shall see you very soon. Where to Go is a podcast from DK Eyewitness. It was produced by Julia Baker, presented by Lucy Richards and James Atkinson with the help of Bella Talbot. For more information about DK Eyewitness, follow us on social media at DK Eyewitness or visit dk.com/eyewitness. And please like and follow the show. And if you have time, leave a review. Your support means so much to us.